as mentioned, I'm Tim. Joining me is Ricky and Jason. But kind of first, just the title slide. What we're going to be talking about is migrating a React Native code base. So basically, we're going to cover a lot of topics. We're not going to get super technical, but we'll kind of dive in a second. So basically, what is the Call of Duty companion app? Just a quick, brief introduction to what this thing is. And kind of where I want to begin is, how many of you know Call of Duty? All right, cool. Probably a lot. How many of you use the Call of Duty companion app? Great. Oh, we got a hand. Oh, and we got someone over here. Awesome. That's more than normal. So you should check it out, though. It's super cool. Has a lot of great features. So kind of what is it? Well, first off, it's a React Native app. So for those of you who don't know what React Native is, essentially, the TLDR of it is it's a really cool way to use JavaScript to build mobile apps for both Android and iOS. So you can go into the Play Store or the iOS Store and download it right now. It has a lot of features. Just to give a quick overview, it has things like heat maps, so you can kind of see the map you played on and where all the activity happened. It has a feed where you can see news. It has a lot of statistics about your kills, how many deaths you had, that sort of thing. Other things too, like CWL, that's our Call of Duty World League. We talk about esports, or the loadout editor, where you can update your Black Ops 4 class from the app and see it appear in game. So these are all the things that we built together and things that we support. So this talk overall, from a broad perspective, it's not really meant to teach you something technical about how to do this in React Native. Really, what we're diving into here is a story about something that we had to do as a team, which was migrating our React Native code base basically to a whole new repository with a bunch of new goals in mind. And so we had a lot of these migration goals, and along the way, we kind of learned a lot of lessons about that. And we think that these lessons are something that you guys could probably learn from too, kind of going into, I know a lot of you has mentioned that soon you'll be graduating from Codesmith, or some of you are here just because you found us on meetup.com or whatever. But, these are things that you have to consider at some point in your career, when you're working on a project. How do you tackle certain tasks, and what lessons can you remember from this talk to be better at those kind of things? So for us in this migration, we had some specific goals. First off, we wanted to upgrade React Native to version 59. React Native has various versions. We were kind of getting behind. We were on 55. But it's important to stay up to date. We wanted to use things like hooks. For those of you who maybe can't get a raise of hand, how many of you have used hooks in React? Yeah, a lot. All right, cool. Well, for a long time we couldn't even use hooks, so they're super nice to use. And then so the next thing, another goal is we had to make a choice about how we were navigating. And before we were using React Native navigation, and it wasn't really working out for us, so we decided to switch to React navigation. And that meant doing a lot of re-architecture stuff under the hood. Not something an end user is really going to see or understand, but a lot of changes in the code base. And part of that goal was we wanted to do deep linking, which is basically you can send the app a link under the hood, behind the scenes, and it'll take the user to a specific place in the app. Maybe you want to get a push notification or something. Another goal was we had to identify and remedy performance issues. When you're working on mobile applications, you have a wide range of users using different devices. Sometimes they're old. That means they can be slow. And if you don't optimize your app correctly, you can have issues where you might get out-of-memory exceptions, where your app is crashing because their phone can't handle what's going on. Or maybe you're rendering an element too many times, and they're just having a really bad, slow experience, and they want to go rate your app 1 star because they don't like using it because of that. So after that goal, we had clean up the code base. Part of understanding, how we work at Activision Blizzard is that the games industry moves really fast. For those of you who are Call of Duty fans, we're coming out with a game pretty much every year. It's been the standard for a while now. So when we had to implement all these features and everything, they come very quickly, and sometimes you have to get things out the door fast. So part of that, means we acquire technical debt. So we kind of had this summer as an opportunity to pay some of that technical debt down and clean up the code base. So what are some of the ways that we'll touch on how we did that? You know, removing old assets. By assets, I mean like image files that aren't being used, refactoring everything. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever had to do a refactor of some code, and then you look back at it and you're like, wow, I really don't like myself for writing it this way. It happens a lot. It happens a lot here, but you know, the goal is to make it better. So the next was to reorganize our file organization by kind of, and I'll talk about this a little more later, but by flattening it and just making sure that everything in our code base, which has like, you know, hundreds of different components and files and all these things, had a correct home to live in. And then the other thing was that we standardized how we were styling and documenting things. So, you know, styling is a lot like CSS, it's making things look a specific way, and how we go about styling. We wanted to all be on the same page. And then kind of the last goal, which we probably won't touch too much on, was we wanted to enhance our analytics. Analytics is just, you know, we want to see how users are using the app, what kind of screens they're navigating to or not navigating to. So that was another goal in this. So lots of different stuff in this migration. Maybe that's good or bad, we'll find out. So kind of, we touched on performance a little bit. Basically, that's how we can make sure that all users are having a good experience on whatever kind of phone they're using. And to kick off into performance and what we did there is going to be Ricky. He's going to take it away.
All right, hello everybody. So today I'm going to show you guys some of the things that we did to enhance our performance. One of the first things that we did was lazy loading. So our navigation, previously we would tap one of the bottom tabs and all of our top tabs will load all at once, just because that's the way it was set up in the past. And new phones can't handle that. Doesn't matter, like it has enough power to do that, but old phones, it just couldn't handle that load. So one of the changes that we did was actually lazy load all of our screens. So whenever it would load, it would just fire off, but none of the other ones would. Another thing that we did was track our renders. So, so like all of our child components, we were just tracking their renders. And what we did was we did like this little custom hook using the useRef. And all we did was in all of our child components, all the components, we would add this into it. And so every single time that the component would render, it would fire off a console log. And so while we're debugging and while we're working, we'll see that number kind of increase. So what would happen was when I first added this, I saw that number just skyrocketing. I was like, what's going on? Why is these components rendering when it shouldn't? We have a homepage that basically when you first load the app, it renders about 5 times because data is just coming in from different endpoints. And so some of those components only need to render 1 time when that endpoint is done firing off. But what I was noticing was that it was rendering all the time. So I was getting about 5 renders when it should only be rendering about 1 time. And so some of the things that I did, some of the things that we did were use a combination of react.memo, use callbacks, and use memo. So there's 3 things. So React Memo, basically what we did was we would wrap this in our functional component. And what that does is basically checks those props. So like if you pass a prop and the prop that's already in there is the same, it would re-render. But if it's different, it would fire re-render. And so that was super useful. But we had to make sure that the parent screen wasn't updating those values. And so one of the things that we did was use callback and use memo, which what that does, it just memoizes the function or the value. And so with the combination of those three things really helped us out. And I want to show you a couple of the gotchas that we ran into. So in the past, I would do this a lot. We would do on press, and I would do an inline function. Or I would pass down styles, or maybe I'll pass down data. And doing that would actually cause a re-render because that function would be a new one every single time, even though I was using the react.memo on the child component. And so in order to resolve this issue, I would remove the inline prop. And so the top one is a function, and the bottom one is a class. I want to show you guys 2 examples. So the top one, I was using React hooks. So basically this right here, the data would be memoized and the dependencies right here would never get updated. So this function, this component would never get re-rendered if the parent component would re-render. Same thing with the class component, we would remove it from the inline prop, and that would basically remove that component from re-rendering all the time. So that was basically what we did all over the app to basically drop down that render count.
Cool. Yeah, no, so we found lots of different ways, and Ricky really led the effort on that and finding out how, like, really digging in deep, like what things are happening in our application that are causing these issues, and you know, finding solutions to it was super helpful. Yeah, how do I switch back? There you go. So next up, another thing that we kind of want to like give you a little bit more meat on and talk about more in depth is navigation. And Jason's going to take that away, and he can swap spots if you want.
Right. So, like we spoke about earlier in the talk, we started our project last year using React Native navigation. And in React, and our application structure has kind of a double tab situation where each bottom tab, we have 5 of them, except for the middle tab, there is no top tabs. But the 4 tabs that are to the left or right of the home screen also have about 3 to 5 categories of top tabs, and deep linking into them and controlling this top tab was all but impossible with React Native navigation. So we switched our library to React navigation, and that gave us the ability to deep link and actually drive the top tabs as well as the bottom tabs from any screen in the app or any like link out of a push notifications or a link on a web page. So it's pretty dynamic. So when we were evaluating whether we wanted to use those, we had to check the difference. We just had to figure out what's the difference between React navigation and React Native navigation. And that one, just being able to control the top tabs programmatically was the big sell. So when we got into building out this new version of the app, it wasn't like we had the exact same navigation system we did before, and it was, I guess, tightly coupled to that. So we had to figure out, okay, what's the differences? Is measure twice, cut once. What's the differences between these libraries, and how much effort am I going to have on changing? Is it going to be in linking this thing to the library? Is it going to be with dealing with anything on it? Well, no, because we went from native navigation to JavaScript navigation. So we were able to eliminate a lot of the issue that we had with the native implementation. On top of that, there were sorry, I just drew a blank. There were outside of that deep linking issue, that was like the main thing we wanted for making that switch. Any other compromise we had, like passing data through navigation with React Native navigation, there was a section of the app that made heavy use of passing params through streams to make sure that that data was available. When we did our refactor and we made better use of our Redux data store so that we don't have to do that as much on the screens where we did pass params across. There are still a few cases where it's necessary to do that. Say if you're going to the same screen from different places, you want to make sure that the same information gets there, regardless of where it comes from. And that's about it.
Yeah. So yeah, navigation was like a super in-depth thing for us to do because really it touched so many parts of the application that it was a huge amount of effort to totally reimagine how the app was going to work to support something different. If you want to switch back. Yeah. So we've kind of covered two of like the more in-depth, like meatier stuff, kind of going into details about like things we changed in the app so far, navigation and performance. Another thing that we can talk about a little bit more that we focus on the migration is organization. So basically, you've all had a project, there's folders in it, you put images over here and you put your JavaScript over here and you have all these styling things and stuff. But it can get kind of crazy when something like the Call of Duty Companion app has, hundreds of components. It has thousands and thousands of lines of code and, endless styling sheets and, maybe hundreds of images. How do you organize all this in a way that keeps everyone sane? Where if someone new comes to the project, they can say, okay, I know exactly where this new component I was tasked with building is supposed to go live. It's so important to have a system so that way everyone can be on the same page and so that you don't have your project, like growing out of control over time and just being super hard to navigate. So for us, we kind of developed a specific strategy that we wanted to use, which I think could probably work in a lot of different React projects. Basically, we split up our code base into three main things for our components. And they are screens, components, and something we call COD components. I know that's probably like not the best name for other projects, but I think you could figure out something similar. And I'll kind of break these down and explain like what each is and why they're important and how they interact with each other. Basically, they all interact with each other through something called composition, which is that you should have components which are composed, made up of other components. So I'm going to kind of work my way up the ladder in describing these, because first we start with just components. We have a directory called components. It's filled with lots of very dumb components. So something like a button or a drop-down menu. All these things that are going to be reused throughout the app a lot and don't have any specific business type logic live in this components folder. And from there, you can import them to whatever you need and reuse them as much as you like. They're very repurposable, very repeatable. And so basically, once we have this folder, we then have the COD component folder. Now, this is bringing it up a level in complexity. We're not just on dumb components anymore. Now we're talking about components that might do some business type logic. You might have something like a friend card. A friend card might have, specific things like you can add a friend or you can click on it to see their profile or something. So in going back to the idea of composition is that a friend card should probably be composed of smaller dumb components. So we might have something like an avatar component that lives there, or a button component that lives inside the friend card, or adding a friend or something. So these COD components reoccur throughout the app in a lot of different ways. Like we might have a message of the day, which is what MOTD stands for, COD component. So once we've built up, these components, and you can use them ideally throughout the app in lots of different places, we then have screens. So screens are like when you're navigating through the app, are like the main screens that you see as a user. Like, oh, you're like, okay, I'm on like my loadout screen, or you're on the news screen, or you're on your friends list screen. And the idea again is to follow composition. These screens are composed of multiple components. We try to focus on them to be composed of COD components, but you also might have dumb components in there too. Like your friends feed might have a button to refresh, for example, at the top. So it's made up of both. This way, when back in the day in the old code base, because things kind of got out of control, we'd have something like a news feed and a home screen. Both of those use a message of the day component. But originally, when people were kind of working on the code base, something like a message of the day component might have originally been built inside of the folder that also housed the news feed. Because at the time, someone wasn't thinking, oh, maybe this will be used throughout the apps in other places. So now, because we've refactored and message of the day lives in pod components, we know that it's something that can be reused in multiple places throughout the app. So that's really like our big approach to organization. So kind of asking like, what lessons did we learn going through this whole process? And really, it's like a double-sided coin or two-sided coin. There's kind of like the bad, which isn't like, it's not that the lessons are bad. They were important lessons to learn, but they might have been painful lessons to learn. So that's kind of the reality. Not everything goes how you want it to go. And we're also going to talk about lessons learned that felt really good to learn. So kind of kicking it off, you know, what felt kind of bad to learn about? So the first point is migrating and paying down technical debt is really hard, especially when you've let your code base kind of grow into this like unruly, overgrown garden. At some point, that's going to catch up to you. You're going to be working on a code base, and you're going to have made a lot of sloppy, quick, duct tape, bubble gum type decisions. And you know, one day it's going to start slowing down your team's ability to make changes quickly, to get things shipped out the door in time for the next Call of Duty release, for example. So it's super hard, but kind of breaking down into that a little more is you need to scope properly. You know, we kind of work in sprints, which are like 2 weeks where we work on specific tasks in that time. And we had a lot on our plate for this specific release. So really you just have to make sure that like you are scoping correctly, like, hey, look, this would be nice to have, but maybe not right now because we have bigger priorities to think about. The other is, yes, don't overfill your plate. It kind of goes for scoping correctly too. You know, sometimes it's like, yeah, maybe upgrading to React 59 right now is important, but maybe throwing on all the analytics stuff at the same time, like maybe that can wait for the next release or something. So, and then kind of breaking down a little more, so yeah, deadlines, especially with this overfill your plate thing, are just like crazy. Like Modern Warfare is going to come out when it comes out. We can't say, nope, sorry, delay the game for a month because that's not ready. So you just have to be very aware of that and pick and choose your battles. And luckily we have great management and product managers who help us realize that. And not everything's going to make it in. Sometimes you do put too much on your plate and you get to the end of your meal and you're like, whoa, I can't eat all this. This is insane. Why did I do that? That's okay too, but part of prioritizing is understanding, I need to make sure I eat my vegetables before I eat my dessert. There's going to be unforeseen blockers too. Things are going to slow down the project that you work on at some point in your career, and you're not going to have been prepared for it. For us, one of those was using like third-party services. So maybe if we use something for analytics, like from a different company or something, maybe we find out that their documentation is really lacking, or getting them on a phone call to explain something is really hard. Those are the kind of blockers that you just can't always account for, and they can really like hamstring things and make you have to change your priorities. Probably the most important one that I think we all walked away from this learning is keep your pull requests as small as possible. So basically how we have it set up is when someone wants to make changes to the code base, they've written this new feature component or whatever, and now it's time to merge it into the code base. We have a process of reviewing it and everything. But in this migration, because we're migrating over so much stuff, these components, it could be thousands of lines at a time. If I were to like migrate over the whole loadout feature, that's a lot of stuff to look at, especially if I'm making a lot of changes to it. So when I put that on my teammates and I'm like, hey, will you like review my code? And Ricky opens it up and it's like thousands of lines. It's really hard to like go through it and actually spot everything like that might be wrong or anything like that. So, keep it like bite-sized when you want to introduce changes, and that way people can process what's going on more and kind of keep up to date about what's changing in your code base. So the good, this is more fun to talk about than the hard stuff, the bad stuff. So the last time I said migrating and paying down technical debt is hard, well, it's also worth it, and that's super good too. Because we spent the time to improve our code base and to clean it up, everyone's on the same page now. we can move quicker on the next set of features. And now we can keep it tidy. It's like if your house gets super messy and you clean it, you're like, wow, I should actually probably keep this clean like all the time. So that's probably it. That's like another huge one is, you know, it's super worth it to hit on technical debt. Always leave your campground like cleaner than how you found it. It also applies in code. Another point is team alignment, being on the same page. That helps us move quicker now too, that we took the time to invest in that. Stuff like styling. Now we don't style things differently. So if someone has to jump in, hey, I didn't work on this feature, but now I need to style it. Like, you know how to change it, same way everyone else on your team would change it. Same with organization. Everyone knows where everything's going to live. That's a huge asset to have. Documentation, super valuable. We document as much as we can. So one thing that happened is Ricky did a bunch of documentation on performance, best practices. So now if I had to onboard someone onto the team, someone new who's going to contribute, I can say, hey, if you want to get up to speed and do this really well, you need to go read Ricky's performance guide. And then you'll know everything you need to know. And it doesn't just have to live in someone's brain, and no one has to go and like pester and like, hey, can you teach me that thing? It's like, whoa, luckily I already like made this whole thing about how to do that. Speeds everything up. Code reviews. Also super worth it to be aligned on as a team. One thing we do is every time we submit stuff, you know, right now it used to be one person has to approve it, which means like you look at the code and you're like, here's everything to change, okay, cool, like, it looks good, or it doesn't look good, I'm gonna flag it and leave a comment about what I don't like about it. Now we have it where two people do it. And part of code reviewing is, yes, you're reviewing the code and you're looking for mistakes or improvements, but you're also, by having to do a code review, more people are aware of what's changing in the project, which means that people, you know, can be on the same page. If, you know, I had to jump in on a feature that Jason was working on down the line, if I had code reviewed it previously, now it's not unfamiliar and foreign to me. I've seen the code before.
And if I've written proper documentation, also, you can jump into that very easily.
It's super duper helpful. Because really, like, as a team, you want to support each other. It's not like you're not islands that exist separately. Every time you choose to invest in things like documentation, you're strengthening your team and you're making it easier to do things quickly. And, you know, kind of going with that code review thing is knowledge. When I see Ricky do something more performant in a new way, like use a React memo, if I'm doing a code review, I'm likely to see it and be like, oh, what is this thing? I want to learn about it. Another point is having a good Git procedure. So I kind of touched on this a little bit already. The whole thing is that basically we have like a master branch, which is like where our final code lives. Like when it goes live into the world, it's on the App Store, we can merge it in the master. Then we have a develop branch, which is like where everything in development can kind of go once it's been approved after it's been merged in from another branch. So we'll have other branches like feature-loadouts. Or we might have things like hotfix - the name of a bug that's happening right now. So really we keep develop clean and safe, and only things that go into it are merged in and reviewed. So the lesson there was, you know, just have a good procedure and you'll have less bugs over time. And then kind of last is, I mean, we've kind of talked about this too, is document as you go. I mean, seriously, it helps a bunch. I know like no one likes documentation like a whole bunch. But really when you're on a team that you like care about and you want to be there for a long time, you want to make everyone's lives better, including yourself, and like get things done, like take that time, because in the long run it helps immensely. So really that's it. We can do some questions now, but if you guys want to connect with us on LinkedIn, you can look up our names. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can check out our @ down there at the bottom. That's it.
We had a question first back there.
I guess the question that I have, as far as documentation, do you guys use like a ticket management system and use that as documentation? Do you put documentation in the code itself?
We have a wiki that we put everything in.
What's that?
We have a wiki.
Oh, okay.
So we have a wiki that we document everything in, we dump it in there. But also when we do pull requests, we like document everything that we did. And then if it's like something really good, like we had a guy that basically rewrote all our styles and like really helped us revamp it and optimize it. And he wrote in our pull request like everything he did, and then all he had to do was just copy and put it in the wiki. And then if we ever have to like see what he did on that pull request or like what the changes were, he can just go in there and review it.
Hey, real quick, is this mine or yours?
That's his, I believe.
I have mine over here.
Wait,
Oh, no, then that's yours. It's
Okay.
not mine. Mine is empty.
All right, thank you.
All right, next question.
As far as testing, how do you guys approach testing?
So we do testing with Jess and Detox. So right now we have it laid out where we have kind of like a middle layer and then the front end where like you have your screen components and everything, but also this middle layer where it's kind of like it handles all our state management and also like our making our in calls, massaging the data. So all of that's basically done with like just Jess unit testing, and then Detox is end to end. So that kind of like simulates the emulator, the phone emulator, and it kind of like taps everywhere that you want and like tests everything that you need to go through. And that's basically how we handle everything.
Kind of to add to that too, like our test coverage probably isn't as great as it should be, and we're working on improving that. It's one of like our current goals right now. We also have a pretty like robust QA team. They like live over in like Atlanta or something. So every time we like make a new build, it like ships over to them, and then they have to like manually go through, and they're pretty good at catching things.
I think yeah, go for it.
What tips do you guys give us to like name the components? Because you said when you have a big application like that,
Yeah.
you have a million names. How are you going to remember like a certain component?
Yeah, naming is the hardest thing for me. It really is. Like you can ask these guys, I'm like, Tim's always like, what does this mean? Like this is all the same. I'm like, yeah, I know, man. What do you want me to change it to? And then we go through and change it.
So for me, like the way like I'll go through like a kind of like an exercise like with myself, or I'll do it with Ricky or something, where I'm trying to like figure out like what does this do, and I try to like think as dumb and caveman like as I can, like friend card thing, and I'm like, oh okay, like I'm getting the core spirit of what this thing does, like just, and if the name ends up being like kind of long, like so what? I'd rather have a name be a little more explicit. Yeah.
All right, you're next.
Were you guys able to set up some kind of system to determine which assets were no longer relevant and could be safely removed, or did you have to go through each one?
I've been relying on my IDE for that. Kind of bad.
But also, as we were bringing things over from the old code base, we were like, okay, we're bringing things over. And a lot of things didn't come over. Some of those assets, we were just like, we're not going to use these anymore. Some of them were really big and like, loading this image all the time, that wasn't really good for performance either. So we were like, we knew that we were going to eventually change some things, and we're like, let's just remove that background. It loads everywhere. It's too much to like, always constantly loading it. So some of those things we did bring over, and we did a full revamp on renaming things too, and like standardizing all that too.
Yeah, and a good bit of the assets that we excluded it was quite obvious that we weren't using them and we're getting rid of them. So it was kind of an easy piece. We didn't have to do too much hunting down. The Phantom, whatever.
I think you're next.
Okay. In introducing hooks, I'm guessing you may have taken some classes and made them just functional components. And do you know if you actually saw a reduction in size because of that? They're supposed to be like easier to compress as functions as opposed to classes. And is that something that you looked at to see if you're making smaller code?
Yes and no. Like as we were refactoring, we were basically also kind of like, sometimes we had a screen that was being used. Let's say we had 3 screens and they navigated to another screen, but those 3 screens were kind of doing the same thing. So we kind of were like, okay, let's just use one screen. And we were doing like the whole Redux. We were like, okay, let's just convert this to Redux. I'm sorry, not Redux, hooks. But at the end of the day, it was kind of the same. You still have the same amount of line of code. You still have to do a bunch of logic in there. So it's kind of like, when I talked to these guys, when we were kind of converting over from some of the things over to hooks, and we were also onboarding a couple of other guys into helping us out as well. We were like, classes and hooks, they can both accomplish the same thing. We did notice a couple of things with hooks, like with use memo and then use callbacks, that we kind of see performance improvement. But overall, both ways were kind of the same. And I think Facebook and all of them kind of set it up that way too.
I think depending on how many elements you have in state locally on a component, you'd see that using hooks could lighten your page up or make it look like, oh man, I got set state for almost every single one of these things. Where I think it's a bit of a, depending on the screen itself or the component itself, you could see it get lightweight or see it just stay the same.
Yeah, I'd agree. We definitely sometimes when I go into things now that like I used to be familiar with, now like I see the hook version of it, I'm like, oh, this is like pretty concise, but like we're not like specifically like we didn't like crunch some kind of numbers. Oh, now we're down 20%.
I didn't mean so much as in like the code, but like the compressed.
Oh, the
like
bundle
the
at the end.
Well, it's kind of hard to measure because, like, as things we were refactoring, we were removing a lot of like duplicates. Like sometimes we were like, you know, some things like we kind of wrote the same. We're like, okay, let's kind of analyze this. It's kind of the same thing. Let's just put it on one screen, and it can handle multiple, you know, business logic and handle different ways we can load a screen up. And so like we did see as we were refactoring, the bundle number was going down as we were building.
Do you guys have like a good like rule of thumb idea for if you're working on making components more generic or consolidating them, like when it becomes time to split something into two things that will do, or when like something's like if there's something that three components are doing very similar things, it might be easier to merge them into one. Is there something you found that is a good indicator of when that's a good choice to make, or is that kind of a?
Yeah, no, I have a lot to say about this. So Google like React composition, I think for me that's like one of the like reading documentation on that like really changed like how I view React and stuff. Like essentially the idea is that you can pass components in as like a prop to then like have it fill a void in the component that you passed it to. So you want to keep your components as dumb as possible. But you could maybe flavor things, because you mentioned like what if three things are very similar or something. It's almost like a flavoring. So you could like achieve stuff through composition where like, you know, maybe you pass through like, trying to think of a good example of something like really dumb. Like maybe you have
like an image icon that need to be formatted a certain way.
Yes. Yeah. So that sort of thing, like, yeah, you want to keep it as dumb as possible, but maybe the thing it lives in is like really good at like having it be a piece of it, is being composed of it. So, yeah, definitely single responsibility principles like that. You don't want to like typically never merge things together off the premise.
And I've noticed that if I feel like I'm doing the same work in those components, like, and it just feels like I'm repeating myself way too much, I'd start to consider maybe this could be a higher order component and do, you know, it create its own component out of itself where it's using some kind of smaller pieces. Cool.
Yeah, you're.
Did you guys consider like tailwinds for Motion.js to actually do that component management?
Honestly, I don't know what those things are.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing them up.
Yeah.
We'll look into them.
Yeah, what are they called?
Tailwind and Motion.js. Motion.js is like inline. Tailwind is like a utility component architecture. So complex, yes.
Okay, we don't use CSS.
Yeah.
Everything is JSX.
Okay.
So I don't know if it would apply or if there's something similar.
Yeah,
or kind
it
of
would.
what's the React Native version.
Yeah. Okay. Right-hand library. And then was there performance considerations, or what was the decision to use Redux?
I think it was just we were used to it. Yeah, it was just preference. You know, in the beginning when we were doing the migration and we were introduced to hooks, I remember reading online something about you can actually replace state management with hooks. I tried to do that, but I was like, no, like it was just too much of a build-up just to like accomplish the same thing that Redux was doing, and I felt like it was just gonna be too much work to like really test it out, make sure that everything was kind of like doing the same thing as Redux was doing. I was able to accomplish everything, but I just wasn't, you know, as confident with like introducing that to like an app that's this big, and so we're like, okay, let's just stay with Redux. You know, we know how it works, and so that's kind of like the reason why we chose that.
I guess the question I had, besides the navigation bit that you mentioned, were there any other big like U-turns you guys had to make because of some like limited functionality, either libraries or React Native on top of platforms?
Big turn.
That and yes, the navigation and our tracking SDK went up a version and it made breaking changes. So it was part of the reason why we even had to upgrade to React 59, and it was the reason why we considered changing our navigation while we were doing it anyway. Again, those were the two kind of major, our analytics SDK and navigation system.
So for the most part, the third-party libraries are pretty reliable, I mean, not like really.
Yeah, I mean, they're not like gonna explode unexpectedly, but you know, we try to take consideration and go check their issues and make sure, you know, that they can play well with whatever other libraries we're using, and that it's, you know, the implementation isn't going to be like down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, one of the gotchas that we ran into was as we were migrating everything to 59, React Native 60 came out, and that completely changed everything. So with 60, the way iOS is built, it makes you use CocoaPods. And so a bunch of the third-party libraries were like trying to get up to date with 60, so they were you know, updating all their stuff. And one time, I think I was adding a library or something, a new third-party library, and I just installed it and it updated everything that we didn't make sure that it shouldn't update. And some of those libraries were like already supporting 60, but it was breaking on 59. We were kind of like, what's going on, you know? And that was just one of the gotchas we ran into. We had to make sure that we always made sure that all of our package modules were updating every single time we were kind of including something new.
Yeah, it's true. 60 is definitely like probably our next big U-turn, like volcano exploding issue that we're gonna run into. Similarly, like what Ricky said about CocoaPods being like obnoxious. It also like forces everyone to upgrade to Android X. So like all your libraries that like worked really good with Android before, like we need to like run through this whole Jetifier thing to like upgrade. And like I tried it, and like man, like one weakness of React Native is like the upgrade process still feels just so hairy. And like all these libraries, like if you're using a lot, we try to keep our libraries like as minimal as possible. Because if you drag a lot in, like, and if that maintainer of that library isn't like updating it quickly enough, and then they're suddenly like, oh, you have to do it this way for 60 to work, and then you have to like use like an old version of the library, and it's like that gets weird, and yeah.
So on top of that, what I did today, because I'm dealing with a library that is specifically like lacking in maintenance, where I cloned it, and we have our own version of it that we make changes to that is supplements our library instead of just using the one that's out in the wild as it is. We have to just tailor it to our own.
Were there any pitfalls or gotchas with applying use memo?
Use memo. Yeah, so I ran into this the other day where, so I'm using a screen that basically a player can use, and also a friend can also use, like a friend profile called the combat record. And so if you were to navigate through a player, that data already lives in Redux, so it's already good. So the very first time it's loading, use memo already, it's the first load, so you don't have to do anything. And my dependencies, I had it off. I didn't have anything in there. But like, if I were to navigate through the friend's profile and go into there, that data doesn't live, so I have to make that call, the endpoint call, fetch the information, and then it's trying to load it in. But that use memo, I forgot to include the dependency, that array at the end, and it was like, oh, you know, it doesn't know what to update, so it's returning undefined. And then it's one of the buttons when I was trying to navigate to something else, that information, that data wasn't there. And so I was like, what's going on? And it was just because I just needed to add that dependency on that. And that's really the biggest gotcha that I have to find.
Make sure you let memo know what
When to
components
update.
you're going to update so that it actually does the re-render when you expect it to.
I kind of want to know, now that you've had some experience with context versus Redux, do you feel that going forward, if you rather use context or still implement Redux on other projects?
I feel like context is showing you what a little bit of Redux is doing. It's like hiding for you. So I feel it's like depending on the app or depending on your use case, you could go with one or the other.
My answer is probably no. Like, I'm not going to change because, like, every time you make a big change in your code base, that comes at a huge cost. Right now, Redux works really well for us. It'd be really hard to be like, we spend a bunch of development time ripping Redux out and redoing it another way when we have like huge features on the way. So.
Yeah. So for Redux, for me, when I first started working on the app, we didn't have Redux, and then we included it. At first, I wasn't really a big fan of it, just because there were some weird things going on where, like, in development mode, it wasn't passing in the information. And I was like, what's going on? It was like some other library that was interfering with it. But now that we were able to kind of like really analyze it and we introduced funcs into it, we have like a system that really works with us. So the way it's kind of set up, it's kind of like Redux is kind of our gateway to our endpoints. And so in our actions, we make that endpoint call, and then we massage it, and then we can either have the option to store it in the store, or just pass it back if it doesn't need to be stored in the store. So we have like this little thing kind of already going for us, and I really like how it's all set up now. But I think with Redux, it can either go really bad or really good depending on how you set it up. And when we introduced funcs, it really helped us out. Go for it.
You talk about how func helped out?
Yeah, so with Redux, basically, like, so there's the action, basically, where you can just, how does it work? Yeah, all right, so actions, you're basically you're getting it ready to the reducer, and then the reducer handles putting it to the store. And so with the action, it allows us the opportunity to make the call, basically massage the information in there, and it allowed us to do the dispatch inside the action. That was the biggest takeaway that I found was, so like, let's say if you're in a screen and I just want to do a dispatch for, like, let's say fetch friends information. So I'm gonna do this dispatch, and then it's gonna go into the action, and in that action, I have the opportunity to pick up the state of the store, and also I have that the ability to do another dispatch, which triggers the reducer to actually save it into the store. And that small spot right there allowed us to basically give us that option to massage the information, to process it, do all our massaging there, business logic, everything in there, and the screen doesn't have to load it or do anything because it's our middle layer. And it cleaned up our screens because it's like, I do all my massaging, I basically just like, hey, screen, what do you need? And just give it to you. So that's the way I like it, yeah.
Definitely let us lighten up the amount of business logic we had living right on the screen.
So is that how you like bring all the logic over to like
Yeah.
the function?
Yeah.
Containerize that instead of putting it inside of the domain.
Yeah, that's the biggest takeaway that I found from it.
Anyone else?
Why do you guys decide on like what's the oldest version of iOS or Android?
We don't.
we try to keep it as old as possible, but I think right now with iOS 13 just coming out, it's gonna be less old. So
I think analytics will help us out as well. Like, we get to see like who's actually using our app. It's kind of hard with the Android because the Android is all over the place. But like with iOS, we know like, okay, not everybody's using the 4 anymore. There's still people using the 5, and people are still using 12 that have updated. Well, I think in 12, 13 is only supporting 6 and up now, 6S and up. So anything under that, it's only on 12. And our app is still going to run on there, so we still have to support that. But with analytics, we will be able to track like who's using this, who's not, and then we can just drop support for it.
It's kind of like a product manager decision too. Like, you know, it's not my job to be like, oh, like I'm gonna go in and look at the data and be like, how many users are using this? There might be things where like I'm solving a bug for a very old phone, and I might be able to go to my product manager and be like, hey, is this working? Like, you know, like is this worth spending time on? And they might say, no, like only like 0.001% of our user base uses this. Maybe that's not worth our time. And then they might make a call like, maybe we'll start dropping support for these things. So like, yeah, we can pitch it, but like at the end of the day, it's not like we get to like have full control over like being like, no more support for that.
So I missed the first part of the talk, so if you guys already went over it, then I'm sorry about that. So is there a web component like that parallels you guys, or are you guys the and if so, do you find that there's differences in the API, or do you guys just take the API and dictate based on the size of the mobile like makes the API different? Like, do you guys have a say in that, or do you guys?
We have a kind of a superset of the same calls that the website would make. Some things that are just around like mobile, like your device and authenticating it, having device ID are whatever extra calls that we have for the mobile app. But for the most part, we can use the same information that the website, the callofduty.com will use if you go there and check your profile. You have a lot of the same behavior and a lot of the same information available to you that's in the mobile app. Other things like the loadout editor and stuff like that are on the site as well, but there will be exclusive, and I can't think of one right now, but there are coming up exclusive features that are app only that would just be endpoints that we only get access to. I'm sorry, there was a second part to your question.
Like you guys dictated as far as like performance a big issue with how you relationship?
Yeah, so we can talk to the guys that write our backend team and say, hey, could we make this data look different, or could we do that? This call comes back too slow, break it into pieces, or whatever.
Yeah, and all our endpoints have versions. So we have like a version 1 endpoint, and then we have like a version 2 if we have to update some stuff. So like anybody who has the old version of the app doesn't like break their stuff. So we keep our endpoints in a version state.
Superset was a really good word too. For that.
I like that word, superset.
Yeah.
Is it just the three of you, and what do you use for analytics?
We use Adobe Experience Platform, and there's one individual that's part of our core team before he's not here. He lives in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And we have a 5th member right now that typically works on the website, but we're doing a bit of the same work that they're going to get ready to do. So he's helping us right now. So we get to have some cross-pollination between the front end and mobile team.
Anyone else?
For mobile, do you have a farm of devices that you test on, or do you use like a third-party service to see how the product's running on different phones, or do you cross your fingers, or?
We have a handful of really crappy devices that we use to be like the best case for performance, I like to think, where if it's going to run amazing on something that's crappy, it's going to run amazing on something that's amazing.
Yeah,
But we get issues from our QA team that will have even worse devices than us and tell us if stuff is crashing, if it's not working well on a brand new thing, and we know it's our fault.
Like I know there's systems too where like it's a lot like a browser stack where like you can go through and test every browser or whatever. We should really have like pay for service like that or something. We don't, because like we figure like we have enough diversity of devices that it's fine. And even in like certain instances where like maybe this old Samsung phone is crashing, and QA has it and they've like repro the bug on it over and over, we don't have access to that. Like they've shipped us that phone before and just been like, okay, like figure it out somehow. So that's like an option too. But like, yeah, I think you raised like a super important point. Like that would be really cool to have something more automated. And that's something maybe we'll move more toward. Like earlier, Ricky mentioned detox and going through it. I know that there's things that you can pair with that will like take screenshots as the detox is happening, or like and testing to so you can make sure every screen looks correct on all the devices. Pretty cool.
Does the team have any experience with Expo?
So no, when we started it, we started back in version 55, and during that time, Expo wasn't like.
It was
it
getting
around?
there.
Yeah, it was kind of getting there.
It's a lot closer now than it was, I want to say, even 6 months ago, where every 6 months with Expo, it can do like an order of magnitude from what it used to be. I started working with React Native at 0.16, and Expo was like non-existent. I mean, it had maybe like a handful of native modules attached to it, and that was our main reason for not going with Expo, because there are certain native modules that we didn't have access to and wanted to bring things in and link things up.
This is like one of the first ones I saw him.
Have you had to do anything where you've like written native code and hooked it in for performance reasons, or have you just been able to work in JavaScript?
Not for well, I don't know. There was like some custom stuff with like the heat maps, right? There was that.
Well, that's all JavaScript though.
So,
But,
so one like native component I had to write, sort of. I guess not really a component, but like I had to do a lot of native stuff related to push notifications, because it's like just the way like you're receiving that stuff, like the operating system levels, like like the Android phone operating system like receives the push notifications. So like on a native level, you have to like interpret that and like do stuff with it that you want to do. Like one thing we did was when we got a certain push notification for the announcement of Modern Warfare, it made like the night vision noise. All that had to be done like natively. We just didn't have a good solution for. I don't even know if there is a good solution currently for doing stuff like that, like in JavaScript.
But we didn't have to like revamp anything like from the native side. So like
not too much, not to squeeze out performance or anything like that. Now to get pieces, firing like early in the app, or making sure things are ready even before the JavaScript bundle gets loaded or ran. Yeah, we've had to touch the native side, but we haven't had to like be super heavy duty or try to squeeze performance out of the app. Definitely not like Ionic or anything like crunchy slideshow style.
Sorry, do you use like Mathbox SDK or anything like that?
no.
We don't really show it. Like, no, we're.
Oh no, that's like it's like custom based on like the point cloud out of the game itself, and it like maps all that stuff on top of an image.
Cool. All right.
One more question?
You guys ever rely on like user reviews to fix stuff or implement stuff?
Yeah,
we do.
What do we Reddit?
We
browse the Reddit.
We hawk Reddit,
Comments, yeah.
and we check the reviews on like the app stores, and we listen. We have an individual that sits very close to us that's part of the project management of the application that actually responds. If you leave a review and it's scathing, he's going to get back to you and figure out why that is an issue for you or what your problem is, and bring it to our attention so that we can remedy it. There's edge cases out there that exist, and a handful of our time, or I guess like a good, I don't want to say a good bit of our time, but we focus some of our energy on making sure that even those edge cases are taken care of, because who's to say that one person having a bad experience isn't going to spread, so they spread bad news, and that just makes opportunity missed on exposing somebody to the app. So
we've also recently added like a feedback thing that will trigger sometimes in the app, where people are like invited to like leave good or bad feedback, and we really do like categorize the feedback, and I think it's like already starting to like make us prioritize like what we're going to fix that can help make the most users happy. All right, so I think we're out of time.